Hey YouTube, Qliphort here, bringing you all an update to my Qliphort Yugioh deck profile for June 2023. I'm a really big fan of the Qliphort deck. I've always tried to update this deck at least once a year, and I've reached the point where it's been over a year since the last update. And since the last update, the last couple versions of the Qliphort deck that I've made have been more of a focus on, the control variant using the heavy back row with the slow play style. So for this update to the Qliphort deck, I wanted to focus more on what the deck was meant to do, which is to pendulum summon out a bunch of Qliphort monsters and then tribute them repeatedly for the higher level Qliphort monsters and their power that they can bring to the field. Now with Master Rule 5, we do have a limit to pendulum summoning, but with some of the cards I run in the deck, as for some of the recovery plays you can use, I'm definitely happy with the results of this updated Qliphort deck. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the main deck monsters, the good majority of our main deck comprises of the Qliphort monsters because Qliphort monsters restrict you from special summoning other cards while you have them in your pendulum scale. Our Searcher Scout, you can pay 800 life points to add one Qli card from your deck to your hand, except for Qliphort Scout. Now this can include monsters, it can also include our spells, or even our go-to trap. Whatever you need for the play, your Qliphort Scout can add to your hand just for 800 life points. So ideally you could use this card multiple times in a game, as long as you have it set up on the field. And if your opponent were to Ghost Ogre it or Ash Blossom, you have some other cards in the deck to at least respond to that card that I am running to at least make up for the destruction or stopping of Qliphort Scout. The other normal monster we run is 2 copies of Qliphort Monolith. With this card, it's the other scale that you ideally want to have with Qliphort Scout on the field, because with this card during the end phase, if you tribute summon this turn, you can draw a number of cards equal to the number of Qli monsters used for the tribute. So ideally with our bigger boss monster, you could draw 3 if you tributed 3 Qli monsters to summon out that Qliphort boss monster, but also some of the other times you can summon and draw for 2 with the 2 tribute cards, or even just the 1 if you go for some of the lower level Qli monsters. For some of the higher number of Qli monsters, I also run 3 copies of Qliphort Carrier. You cannot special summon monsters except for Qli monsters, just like all the other ones. And with the lower scale Qli cards providing a boost for your own cards, giving them all 300 attack, and the higher scale ones providing a lower for your opponent's monsters of 300 attack, you can have some boosts on the field for your different Qli monsters. Carrier, when it's tributed, allows you to bounce a monster on the field back to the hand. So it's very useful when you go up against your opponent, being able to bounce their extra deck cards. And if they try to negate the effect of Carrier, they won't be destroying the monster that was tribute summoned out, because your Carrier will be in your extra deck, and then you will have to have them respond to that play and not the actual card on the field. And there's actually a play I really do like to use, but before that, the other 3 of that we run is Qliphort Helix, running 3 copies of this card as well. Just like Carrier, when Helix is tributed, you can destroy a spell or trap on the field. You could also destroy your own if you wish to clear out another card in your pendulum scale for Qliphort Helix, but this card is a spell and trap destruction, which you can ideally clear your opponent's back row as well, thanks to this card, and then have nothing to worry about when you use your own card effects. But the big play with the tributes for cards like Qliphort Helix and Qliphort Carrier comes in the form of Qliphort Stealth, which I'm running 2 copies of. When this card is tributed, you can bounce a card on the field back to the hand. So if you don't have a card on your opponent's field, you could ideally bounce one of your scouts as well back to your hand to then reuse against, and Scout is not a once per turn. But the big play also comes in the form of, depending on what you tribute, let's say you have Carrier and Helix on the field, and you tribute both of them to summon out your Qliphort Stealth. If you declare in the effects the chain links being Helix Chainlink 1, Carrier Chainlink 2, and then Stealth Chainlink 3, and bouncing a card in your field, or your opponent's field, your opponent cannot activate in response to Stealth's effect. So in turn, they can also not respond to the rest of the chain link, meaning that all of these cards will resolve without your opponent being able to activate anything in response. Your opponent will have 2 cards bounced and a spell or trap destroyed on the field, which is a definite power play, because then you have a big monster on the field that can either swing into your opponent's other cards while having a good amount of the back row or other monsters on the field taken care of. For the other 2 I run 2 copies of Qliphort Shell. With this card, when it's tributed, it also is unaffected by the activate effects of monsters whose original level or rank is lower than this card. That's a key thing to remember as well with all of the Qli monsters. They're unaffected by any monster whose level or rank is lower than their own. So level 4 or rank 4 monsters are a big play. The only thing that can really get around these without them having a response to them are link monsters, so remember that. But any monster whose level is lower than the we own Qliphort monsters is unaffected. So if your opponent tries to use any monster effect of those monsters, they won't be able to work against the tribute summoned Qliphort monsters on the field. Qliphort Shell can do piercing against your opponent, but it also can attack twice. So if you clear out your opponent's field or hit into some of their lower level or weaker monsters, you could be hitting for some big damage thanks to this card. If your opponent doesn't have any monsters, that's 5,600 attack points in total that this card can provide. With some of our lower monsters being cards like Qliphort Disc and Qliphort Cephalopod, 1-ofs for each. Cephalopod can regain and burn damage to your opponent while regaining you life when it tributes someone out, depending on how many monsters your opponent has in their graveyard compared to yours, which you having a Pendulum deck, you really shouldn't have that many monsters in your graveyard to begin with. And Qliphort Disc can summon out 2 Qliphort monsters when it's tribute summoned out, just with a special summon. Now, normally, if you attribute summoned out Qliphort Disc, you would have already used your normal summon, unless you have cards like Laser Clip on the field. But you can use these additional Qliphort monsters as a link summon to be able to go into Qliphort Genius, giving you a link monster to utilize on the field when you summon out more and more monsters on the field as well. Or if you go for the summon of a Pendulum summon and you go for Qliphort Genius for the extra deck play, you can use cards like Qliphort Disc to summon those 2 monsters to the arrows that your Genius points to, and then get the search from there also. With our last monster being the boss monster, Qliphort Skybase. Now, if you have towers, you can run towers in the spot of Skybase. I'm a fan of Skybase just because you can take your opponent's monsters and use them against your opponent for some of the finishing plays against them. And the bigger Qliphort boss monsters, while not being pendulums, are unaffected by your opponent's spell and traps on top of any monsters whose level or rank is lower than them as well. That's it for the main deck monsters. Moving on now to the spells. We're running 3 copies of Sacrifice. It is an equip spell with 4 card effects. You can equip it only to a Qli monster. It gains 300 attack. Cannot be destroyed by battle. It can be treated as 2 tributes. And when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add 1 Qli monster from your deck to your hand. So even if you have your opponent destroy this card, you will still get the search as long as it goes to the graveyard for a Qli monster from your deck to your hand. But providing a 2 tribute means that you can tribute 2 cards on the field. For Skybase, counting 1 monster as 2 tributes and then having 1 additional one as well. So the less monsters you have, as long as you have this spell, can give you a search after you go for the tribute also. And running 3 copies of Summoner's Art just as a search for our normal monster, being the Qliphort Scout or Monolith. If you open up 2 Summoner Arts in your hand, you can add both off of the card and then have another tribute search for your Qliphort Scout. And also running 1 copy of Laser Quip. I really do like this card in the deck. During your main phase, you can normal summon 1 Qli monster in addition to your normal summoner set. You can only gain this effect once per turn, and normal summons of Qlis cannot be negated. So a big play there for sure, stopping your opponent from negating the normal summon. But also, if you need to, you can go for the 2 normal summons of cards like Qliphort Helix and Carrier, using them both, then to link summon out your Qliphort Genius, which I'll go over the combo play, utilizing the Laser Clip opening with those 2 cards at the end of the video also. I also run 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. Now with this card, you draw 1 card for every 3 cards banished. For the rest of this turn after this card resolves, you cannot draw cards by any card effects. We really don't utilize much in the extra deck aside for Qliphort Genius. So as long as you have 1 copy of Genius to use, Extravagance can provide an additional draw that you may need. And also it does limit you because you cannot draw by card effects for the rest of this turn. So it will shut down your Monolith. So remember that when you want to choose what else to set up in your pendulum scale, and you may prefer to go over the power boost instead of the monolith scale set. I also run 2 copies of Pot of Desires, just more draw power, and these cards really do come in handy if your opponent does stop the scout play, because then just being able to draw into additional Qliphort monsters will help for any of the other extra deck or pendulum summon plays you may want to go for. Another response for if your opponent, let's say Ghost Ogres or Ash Blossoms, your Qliphort Scout, 2 copies of Triple Tactics Talent. So then you can activate this card and draw 2 cards. That could potentially be the draw needed to go into 2 very important cards, depending on what you draw off of the Triple Tactics Talent, to then continue your Qliphort plays. And moving on now to the traps, I run 1 copy of Climate Change. Now this card can add up to 3 face-up Qli Pendulum monsters from your extract to your hand. You can only activate 1 Climate Change per turn, but this card is a one-of because it is searchable with Qliphort Scout, and then you can just set this card, and if your opponent does try to destroy it, you can activate in response, and then just add back 3 different Qli monsters to your hand. So if you have full Pendulum Scale, then you can just use the Pendulum Summon of all these cards add to your hand, and then the 1 additional card you may have in your extract to begin with. And then the other traps I run are 3 copies of Skill Drain. Now, I really like Skill Drain because, one, if you already have your Sky Base set up on the field, the card will be unaffected by Spell and Trap. So summoning out your Sky Base first, then activating Skill Drain will stop your opponent, but still give you an active Sky Base to be able to take their monsters if they try and go on the defensive. And any of the tribute plays for your Qliphort cards will still resolve since they're not on the field to activate. So you'll also be able to bounce your opponent cards and also destroy their Spell and Traps while this is on the field. With the last of the traps just being 2 copies of Lose One Turn and 2 copies of Rivalry of Warlords, since machines are the only things we really play, and the Lose One Turn goes when your opponent special summons a monster, and only if you control no special summon monsters, which can easily be activated since if you'll most of the time have just a tribute summon monster on the field to begin with. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. I run 3 copies of Qliphort Genius. Now, this card is in here more for the setup of your Qliphort cards. When you summon out this card, if you're your opponent and then you have this in your extra monster zone, you get 2 monsters back from the extra deck as well. So you can pendulum summon out 2 Qliphort cards to the arrows that they point to. And then with those 2 summons, you can then use Genius to add a level 5 or higher machine monster from your deck to your hand. So then you can add your bigger Qliphort monster to your hand to use, and then use this card and the 2 tributes for that summon of that additional Qliphort monster on the field, giving you that search. And they may have their effects negated, but the tribute effects will still be able to resolve since they're only negated while they're on the field. And then for the additional Link monsters, 1 copy of IP Masquerena, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Phoenix, 1 Akashic Magician, 1 Decode Talker, and 1 Nightmare Unicorn. You rarely ever go into these. They're mostly in here just as options, and if your opponent does clear your Pendulum Scales, then you can access the extra deck, but still just in here for added options. Otherwise, they're just engine fodder for the Pot of Extravagance, and also the 1 copy of Magister Paladin, 1 Silent Honor Arc, 1 Gaga Cowboy, 1 Tornado Dragon, 1 Dark Rebellion, and the 1 Volcasaurus for the rest of the Xyz plays in the deck also. I see Xyz summons more just for the fact that if you have cards like your Laser Clip, being able just to normal summon out 2 Qliphort cards, you'll most of the time want to go for the Genius Link summon, but then otherwise, if you don't have any cards in your Pendulum Scale, you could just overlay the 2 into a rank 4 Xyz monster. And then as for some of the go-to plays in the deck for our summons, we have the setup like I said before. Let's say you have your Laser Clip, and then all you need are 2 additional Qliphort monsters, and then the search power, whether it be the Summoner Art or if you have the Scout in your hand already to begin with. So just having Laser Clip, or even just the setup with the Scout and the 2 other additional monsters, even if you don't have the Laser Clip, let's say you just have Qliphort Scout in your hand, you would just need the 2 other Pendulum monsters and then just an additional search or 1 more Qliphort card in your hand to complete the Pendulum Scale. So other than that, you can either go for the Clip in your hand or just the 1 search, because then you'll activate the Scout and search out the needed Laser Clip to your hand as well. So what you'll do is you'll activate the Scout. Let's say these are the other 3 cards in your hand. You will then pay 800, adding the Laser Clip to your hand. You will activate the Field Spell. Then you have now 2 normal summons for your play. So you'll normal summon out the first Qliphort Carrier. Its attack becomes 1800. You'll use the second normal summon to then go for the additional play of your Cephalopod onto the field. And then you will go for the Link summon using both of these cards on the field for the summon of your Qliphort Genius on the field also. You will then complete the Pendulum Scale with the Monolith that you set up as well. And then for the play, your Qliphort Genius is unaffected by spell and trap effects and effects of activated other Link monsters. And once per turn, you can target a face-up card on the field. On each player's field except this card, both those cards have their effects negated. But the big play now comes down to when you Pendulum Summon, because then you'll use your 2 cards, being the Pendulum Summon for your Qliphort Genius on the field, to then summon out both of your Qliphort cards. And then from that play, Qliphort Genius will activate, and you will be able to add the Qliphort card from your deck to your hand, which will be your higher level monster to utilize. Now with this play, you have used both your normal summons for the Laser Clip. The big play can also resolve with this if you have multiple Qliphort cards for the summon, because then if you have just that 1 additional monster in your hand to use, you can go for the additional Pendulum Summon, giving you the 3 monsters on the field. So then you'll have the 1 additional Qliphort card to summon out onto the field as well. It could even be another Scout if need be, because then what you can do is you can use the play once again for the Pendulum Summon to then give you the Link summon into the Qliphort Scout. But then this play will come down to if you have the additional Qliphort sacrifice to equip onto the Qliphort carrier for that tribute of 2 monsters on the field, protecting this card, or whichever one you want to equip onto it, and then giving you the additional Qliphort disc for the following search, to then tribute out, giving you the 2 searches off of Qliphort Genius as well. Yeah, but that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, Qliphorts are one of my favorite to use, and definitely love that I was able to update it with the added play for more of a pendulum focus than a control trap aspect for the deck. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.